I can't tell you how many times where, if I have a slight ounce of confidence, I can get over the hump. I can believe in myself. Nobody's second guessing me. But if I lose just the slightest ounce of confidence, how I could like barely get up out of bed, and I'm worried about my bracket, or I'm worried about playing certain players that are matched up on my bracket. But yeah, just finding a more pure version of myself, that hero to zero theory, I feel like is super beneficial. Like I'm much more grateful now. Something we talk about as well is just having a better connection with my wife and my family, and how if that's connected, I can perform better. I can believe in myself better. But I think there's so many variables that go into that.
In mental health research, we focus very heavily on like receptors and brain regions, and it's very individualistic, like the serotonin receptor or the dopamine receptor. There's another level to that, right? Like it's not like brains exist in isolation. Like you inherited your brain from your parents. You passed the brain that your kids have onto them genetically, right? And we can start to think of ourselves as nodes in a network, not just, hey, there's this serotonin receptor and it matters for being antidepressant in a certain way that we hit it with a medicine. Like your whole brain connects with your wife's whole brain in these unique ways that either promotes or demotes, health and wholeness and happiness in your family.
What's going on? My name is Tyson McGuffin. Welcome to the McGuffin Show. We got a new setup today. I'm here downtown with my guy Colton at his little studio setup. So pumped to be in here. Got a special guest on today. I've known this man for the last year now. I met Dr. Ben through Wild Health, and I've been with Wild Health now for the last year. And they do all my lab work, and lab work kind of led to me taking it a step further. And working on my diet, working on myself, and working with my mental performance coach. I have Ben on here. Ben has pretty much done everything in his lifetime. Army medic. He just wrote a book called Antiheroes Journey. He's also a podcaster. Specializes in psychedelic therapy. Does ketamine-assisted therapy. Is a brilliant human. Happy to have him on. Ben Askins, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, it's a pleasure to see you, brother.
Pleasure to see you, man. So Ben, tell us, where do you live at?
Yeah, I live just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. I have a small, it used to be a horse farm, but I don't have any horses just yet. Just outside Louisville, and work out of two clinics, one in Lexington and one in Louisville there, like you said, doing ketamine-assisted therapy, and we're lining up everything to do MDMA-assisted therapy next year whenever the FDA hopefully reschedules that med, so we can do a lot of really good, really healing work in the mental health field here in the Bluegrass State.
Line that stuff up, buddy. And Ben, so we definitely have one thing in common. We both love combat sports. You do some grappling, and you filled me in on how grappling kind of breaks you down a little bit. Makes you a softer human. Maybe makes you a bit more grateful. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. It's like folding laundry with people still in it is the way I like to think of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? Like a lot of my life right now involves these non-ordinary states of consciousness, as they call it in psychedelic assisted therapy, right? And honestly, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, grappling, combat sports is this non-ordinary state of consciousness for anybody who's not doing it professionally, right? It's not normal to put all your weight on someone else's throat in anything other than a life and death situation. And then to just stop because they tap you gently on the shoulder is a non-ordinary thing to do. So there's a whole bunch of ways that, physiologically there's benefit to all of the exercise and all of the work that's going on there. But there's a bunch of psychological benefits to that level of intensity followed by trust, that you've got these people that you're doing this hard work with, where you're essentially activating all the fight or flight stuff, all the life and death stuff, and then just stomping on the brakes and stopping as soon as somebody says uncle. There's a ton of therapeutic hay to be made around that in like translational psychiatry work, right?
Love it. Yeah. So I obviously grew up as a wrestler. My dad was a wrestling coach for like 40 years, and something my dad used to say is that you have to love to suffer. And something I have figured out through combat sports and figured out through getting lots of tattoo ink on my body and cold plunging is that, it is so powerful if you can find find comfort in that suffering, or be able just to come out of it and be a better human, find your breath work, but just, find something comforting about it. And actually, this morning, I got my butt up, got 30 minutes in the sauna, 10 minutes in the plunge.
Nice.
Worked out that inner devil that always is making me second guess myself in the morning, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that guy that says, hey, it's like Jocko has all of his YouTube channel around you just want to stay in bed this morning, don't you? You just want a donut, don't you? All of that's all those motivational speeches where there's just the devil whispering in your ear. Wouldn't it be nice to just stay under these warm covers right here next to the love of your life? Nah, fuck that shit. I'm going to work.
So yeah, something I love to do is stuff that thing down in the morning, get a nice 5 to 10 minute plunge in, and then do the same thing at night. And I feel like, if I can challenge myself early on in the day, push that thing aside, it sets the tone for my day, and makes me feel like nothing else can get to me,
Yeah, there's a famous Christian theologian, W.G.T. Shedd, has this quote that if you eat a live frog first thing in the morning, nothing worse will happen to either of you for the rest of the day. And some days, man, I feel like I'm the frog getting eaten, but I still, the rest of that day, nothing's worse than getting up first thing before the sun's coming up and kicking the ice off of my cold plunge outside, and then jumping into that thing and screaming at the sky. After that, just come at me, bro, with the rest of the
Go
time,
ahead,
right?
come at me, okay? I double dare you.
Whatever you got, it's not going to be worse than whatever I threw at myself in the first place. I've always been that way, man. Combat medic school, they do these shark attacks, and you get they call them smoke sessions. You're just going to do all the PT until you puke, and then you're going to pick the puke up, and you're going to put it in your pocket, and you're going to keep doing the PT. And I used to bust out a textbook. We'd be doing flutter kicks, and I'd be doing homework at the same time. Just come at me. Just fuck me up. It's going to be as bad as it's going to get. There's a limit, right? It's not infinite. So just come at me with that stuff, and you'll survive, or you won't, and that's okay too. We'll get there.
Love it. So Ben, I got to meet you for the first time there in Kentucky. I did a little 2-day clinic for all the Well Health guys.
Yeah.
And I got to meet your beautiful family. Got to meet your wife, is it Jenna? Sorry.
Jana. Yeah.
Jana. Yep. Jana, and then your 2 kids, and it was great meeting your family. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah. That was a fun week for sure.
That was a fun little week.
I talk about in my book about hey, we live in a simulation, and it's a crazy simulation. It's crazy that the first time that I ever actually played pickleball is with the GOAT, the greatest pickleball player of all time, Tyson McGuffin, in Papa John's backyard on his private pickleball court. That was the first time I ever actually played the game, man.
That property sucks, by the way. It sucks. I mean, tell the guy to get a bigger house, okay?
Yeah. Where could he fit another house? Well, you have to cut out a golf course, one of the holes on the golf course out back there, right? And I didn't get skunked. Stupid. I lost 12-1, right? At least I scored, There
you go.
But yeah, that was a pretty crazy, pretty fun weekend there. And getting the families together, that's a big deal. That's been a bunch of some of the work that, we've done together is translational work, right? Trying to figure out all of the ways that being successful in business or in a professional sport or whatever, the ways that those sorts of attitudes translate into the home front is something that, I've struggled with in my own life. Being a platoon sergeant, there's a particular way of being that works with leading soldiers that does not directly translate to being a husband and a father successfily, right? Correct, you don't just yell at your kids and they all fall in line and they do whatever the hell you want them to do, right?
Why not? Okay, come on.
They don't even have whole brains, man. You don't even get a whole brain until you're 26 or 27. You're using words and all they're hearing is loud noises at that point because they're basically a brain stem wandering around. They look like people, but they're just brain stems. They're something out of a zombie movie, right? You need to nurture that brain until it's about 26, and then you can have a meaningful conversation with it. But we're always trying to use these words, which are just blunt tools for kiddos, right? But translating, the principles wind up being the same, right? The ways of leading, the ways of communicating, the ways that you play, mixed doubles are different than whenever you play solo. We talk about, the read step and the third step drop and all of the sorts of things that are helpful for you on the pickleball court, how does that translate into being a dad? How does that translate into being a husband? What are the ways to take a read step at home? Some of that stuff is a big deal for, working hard and playing hard and resting thoroughly is a big deal for performance mindset. And that, that's something that I'm learning at home just as much as anybody else is, right? Like I'm not the greatest husband, the greatest dad in the universe, but I'm learning all the lessons and I'm learning how to love people, right? And that's the thing, right? Like if you're leading with love, then you can fuck up pretty hard and still kind of, pick yourself up and dust yourself off.
That's a great quote.
For
sure. For sure. And something that we've touched on heavily is understanding that drop step. Anytime my wife, and it still happens to this day, even though we've been working on it for a very long time now, she addresses a problem, and I go right to being reactive and trying to fix a problem. Versus, hey, she could really care less about my opinion. She just wants me to take a little drop step, listen, hear her out, but I don't have to fix it. Yeah. And something that's been very beneficial for me, is just understanding to just kind of give her distance there and not be so reactive with my opinion, and use that drop step wisely.
Yeah, all gas, no brake at home gets you into a whole lot of trouble.
It doesn't get you anywhere. It doesn't. Slow the hell down.
Yeah, just take a breath. What's so hard about breathing? But yeah, I got to breathe in and shout something right away, right?
So just kind of taking us back. So just give us your general story.
Yeah. I grew up, my dad was a Vietnam vet. He was a real loving guy, but it's kind of I think a familiar story to a lot of folks, right? Like it was a good home. My parents stayed together. They loved each other and they loved their kids, but it was occasionally surprisingly violent. And I had to learn how to navigate the world with those sort of little surprise attacks along the way. Like, oh yeah, I screwed this up this way last week, but this week it's a way bigger deal. And, collecting a beating for it or whatever. And, that my dad was, he was a good man, but he was a hard man. He was a survival, escape, resistance, and evasion instructor in Vietnam, which like SEER school is no joke, man. It's a whole bunch of starving and hiding and running. And that was kind of how I grew up was hard. Like you're going to learn how to be hard. You're going to learn how to survive. I learned kind of a mix of humor and negotiating and arguing and then just shutting the hell up and knowing when to like stick your head down and just not be seen and all of those sorts of things that you learn in a family system where there's somebody who's survived being in combat before. It's not an easy thing. My dad was my hero and I wanted to be like him growing up, so I was super active, played a ton of sports in high school, went varsity on all the things, football, basketball, baseball, wrestling, track, boxing, all of that stuff, and like all the clubs and all of the just, honors classes and being a lot smarter than I look and working real hard there and wanted to join the military at 17, but found out I was colorblind and that disqualified me from all of the like special forces stuff that I was super interested in doing. I wanted to be a PJ, a pararescue jumper in the Air Force, and was genetically disqualified at 17 from doing that. It's kind of a funny story. It was wrestling season, and I had 3 mohawks. One of them was red, and 2 of them were green. There's a picture in the back of the book. Yeah.
Show me that photo now, okay?
Yeah, there's a photo and a picture. It didn't happen. Yeah, I had red and green mohawks, went in to enlist to be a PJ, and they said, hey, man,
dangerous.
You're red-green colorblind. I was like, bullshit. I dyed my hair this color. I know what color it is, but apparently, I'm deficient in that particular regard. It ruled out kind of my dream. I had my dream taken away at 17. Trying to chase down being this superhero, soldier. But, medicine was always super interesting to me, so I tried to figure out a way to do that in civilian life. Wound up going to college, getting a double major in outdoor education and intercultural studies with a minor in Swahili, spending a bunch of time in Africa as a study abroad student, and then doing some work there afterwards with, non-government organizations and stuff like that. And wound up getting my first job out of school was teaching wilderness emergency medicine. So I taught a bunch of like high angle search and rescue and swift water search and rescue stuff, just trying to sort of follow a similar track in civilian life to what I thought it would look like to be, in special operations of one kind or another in the military. And then I got to be about 27 years old, and I had a whole brain and still decided it'd be a good idea to enlist into the military. Like, I had a bachelor's degree, and anybody in the military knows if you got one already, you could be an officer, and officers get paid a whole lot more and have like a cushier life than the enlisted bubbas do. And I was like, nah, you know, my dad didn't have a real high opinion of officers. I think I'll just enlist as a combat medic. I'd been, you know, a street medic for over a decade there at that point, and decided if America was going to send her sons and daughters into harm's way, maybe they ought to have a decent medic along. So I just enlisted as... I couldn't talk my wife into the active army, so I joined the National Guard, the part-time bullshit lie that they sell out of recruiting there, about like 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks every summer, turned into, you know, like a year here and a year there and a year everywhere except home. You know, and if it tells you anything about my ability to make good decisions, like I said, I was 27 whenever I enlisted. I had a whole brain, and, you know, usually they trick 17-year-olds who only have half a brain into jumping in on that particular grenade. But I went for it anyway. It was kind of my last chance. I was like, well, I'm old enough now. If I'm going to serve, it's going to be now or never. And we decided to do that. So wound up deploying to Iraq in 2011 as a combat medic. Got promoted way too fast, way faster than anybody should, to staff sergeant in about 3.5 years. Was a platoon sergeant over there for that deployment. Came home, used my GI Bill to get a Master of Divinity degree from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville. But it turned out I was a much better soldier than I was a preacher. I like to cuss and fight a little bit too much to fit into like a leadership role in a church. So I was fortunate that the National Guard selected me to go to what's called the Inter-Services Physician Assistant Program, or IPAP. And that's a 29-month academic beatdown. It's essentially like about as hard intellectually of a program as you could imagine getting into. PA school's no joke in the first place, and doing it the Army way makes it extra dumb sometimes along the way. It's just drinking water from a fire hose the whole time. You know, exams are on Mondays and Fridays, and here's 10,000 slides and a bunch of pages to read. Good luck. And, you know, you get your study group of your buddies, and you get through that process together. I decided for whatever reason that it would make sense while going through the first phase of PA school to also train for my first ultra marathon. So I ran a Spartan obstacle course ultra marathon in the senior semester of that year. So like Friday morning, I'm taking an obstetric gynecology final exam and aced that test, and then driving 4 hours away and getting a hotel room and getting
Dude's
up
a beast.
The ass crack of dawn, and then running for 9 hours through this obstacle course ultra marathon. I wanted to come in under 9 hours, and I came in at exactly 9 hours and 1 goddamn minute, and it still eats me up. And you know, drove home, hands cramping the whole way, like drove myself home, went alone to do all this because I couldn't trick anybody else into coming along with me. And got home, spent all day Sunday like in an ice bath listening to audio lectures because I had a hematology oncology exam on Friday morning or on Monday morning the next day, and I had to get ready for that. So went in and got a 98 on that and was super pissed about those last 2 points, man. That last minute, those last 2 points. God damn. That's like the beginning and the end of life there, man. Like I had an exam about the beginning of life, obstetrics and gynecology, and then I had an exam about oncology, that's cancer, on Monday morning. And in between, I ran this obstacle course ultra marathon and wound up coming in like 49th out of 680, which qualifies you for like the world championships or whatever. So I went to the Army and said, hey, can I go to Iceland and run this world championship thing? And they were like, no, fuck you. Sit down. Like, you got homework to do. You can't go to Iceland and run some stupid
Get your ass to
race
work.
or whatever. Yeah, I was like, all right, fair enough. Yeah, you guys are right.
And you are a psycho, you know that? That's how you are.
It just seemed like balance to me. Like I was going through an intellectual obstacle course ultra marathon. I needed a physical one to train for and to endure, to create balance between my body and my mind, right? And you know, got done, was one of the like finished in the top 10% of the class from phase 1, went to phase 2, which is all a clinical year. And that was where like my life took a real sharp turn. I was planning on going into emergency medicine. As you can tell, I was a bit of an adrenaline junkie, and, you know, had some tactical and wilderness and expeditionary medical experience, and wanted to just, you know, continue on that route. And then I lost a good friend of mine to suicide partway through the second phase of that program. And the day after getting the news about my friend's death, we had an intentional overdose come into the emergency room. You know, like I just sucked it up, went to work. Like we said, like eat the frog. I got this bad news on a Sunday. Monday morning, 6 o'clock, I'm at the emergency room, and this beautiful young lady had taken like everything in her medicine cabinet. She just had enough of planet Earth at that point. And she came in, and I knew what to do as far as like emergency medicine stuff goes, to stabilize her, intubate her. But the prognosis after a first attempt like that, both medically from the amount of time that your brain's not oxygenated to the damage done by the high doses of whatever she took, things aren't going to be the same probably ever. And then psychologically, after the first time someone makes an attempt, the likelihood goes up significantly of future attempts as well. So
it's scary.
Because I had the Master of Divinity degree, I managed to talk the chief of the ER into, after intubating this lady and putting her in the ICU, they let me go with the chaplain and sit with her family. I met her husband and her little girl. And her husband, was my age, and her little girl was the same age as one of my little girls. And my heart just broke, man. And sometimes you find your calling, like, from the things that you enjoy, and like I enjoy having a good time and doing hard things and stuff like that. But sometimes you get it from stuff that breaks your heart. And being in that room, man, it just broke me in a whole bunch of ways that I'd never been broken before. And I decided right then and there, I didn't know what it would mean, but I was like, I'm going to do something about this. This is what I'm going to do with my life. I don't understand why people get into this suicidal headspace. I understand it better now, but I want to do something about it. And I didn't know what that meant, but since then, I graduated from, the PA program in January of 2020. Got my medical license in February of 2020, and then March 2020, you know what happened. COVID shut down the whole planet. It's a super weird time to try to start a medical practice, right? And I got hired straight out of school into a psychiatry practice, and they were doing ketamine-assisted therapy outpatient. So a ton of patients that you would normally want to hospitalize, I wound up taking care of, baptism by fire, straight out of school with ketamine-assisted therapy. And ketamine's a unique medicine. We could talk about that more if that's something that's of interest. But it has this acute anti-suicidal property that's really hard to replicate in any other medicines. So I wound up for about a year and a half just managing the sorts of patients who are acutely suicidal enough that you would normally want to put them in the hospital. But putting them in the hospital, it was a potential COVID exposure risk. So I was just managing them outpatient. And I wound up, getting pretty good at sitting with people who are at the end of their rope and kind of helping them walk it back to where they want to live again. And right around the time that I was getting my head above water from a bunch of that, because that was super stressful for me. I mean, behind the scenes, I was drinking a whole bunch just to get by, and had a whole bunch of my own trauma along the way that I wind up talking about a bunch in the book. Right. I got a notification of sourcing. I wound up deploying again as a physician assistant for an infantry battalion here in Kentucky over to Kosovo for most of last year, which was good for me because I stopped drinking. It's harder to drink on a deployment, and wound up, deciding I'm just done with it. I'm not touching the bottle ever again. It's not even interesting to me. It's kind of a boring substance. It's neurotoxic. It kills brain cells and heart cells. Why would I want anything to do with that?
Get rid of that shit.
No shade on anybody that enjoys it. I understand why they enjoyed it, but I'm done with it. And, more people got done with it, it might be a better world. But came back, and 3 months later was in MDMA-assisted therapy training for PTSD, and got certified with the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies to do PTSD therapy. Like I was saying earlier, we're Dr. Kristen Dawson and I are the only two prescribers in the state of Kentucky at this point, as far as we know, who've had that training for when that gets legalized next year. And then, I've been working at Wild Health along the way. You got to meet the whole crew there.
Hey,
a bunch of the docs. Great
if you don't
people.
mind, just give us a little insight on Wild Health, what they do for patients, what they prescribe, things like that.
Yeah, Wild Health. Go to wildhealth.com if you want to check them out, and you can use the code all caps DOC, D-O-C, to get 20% off your membership there. We do what's called personalized medicine. It's the sorts of medicine that's usually reserved for the richest folks on the planet, and we're trying to figure out ways to get that out to everybody. It involves extensive lab testing and what's called genomics-based precision medicine. We take a look at the human genome for individual patients and get an idea about some of your risk scores for chronic diseases. If you make it into your 30s and 40s, it's different things that kill you at that point, like cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndromes, cancers, neurodegenerative disorders, and then what are called accidents. If you get old enough and you fall down and you break a hip, that can be the end of life for you. So we take a look at a whole bunch of the risks of developing chronic diseases in the first place and try to prevent that from happening. If you look at centenarian studies, the people who make it to be 100 years old, it's not that they live the last 30 years of their life with cancer and everybody else dies within a few years of diagnosis. It's that they manage to push their cancer diagnosis off into their 90s instead of into their 60s. And what's different about them, we're trying to help people solve for, where the current medical standard is to just sort of let people live their lives however they want. And whenever you develop diabetes or develop cancer, then we try to do as much as we can for you on the back end. The way that we approach things in Wild Health is to try to look at your risks ahead of time and then mitigate those risks as much as possible so that you can live as long as possible and be healthy for as long as possible. We call it health span instead of just lifespan. There's a whole bunch of ways that we've got health coaches that work very closely with every patient, and then we have doctors that are see the patients on a regular basis. There's a whole treatment plan. You get this 50-page printout about your genetics and your labs that's unique to you and real specific. And honestly, behind the scenes too, it's one of the greatest places in the world to work. Like the doctors and the coaches there are some of my best friends in the whole world. For sure. The CEO, Dr. Matt Dawson, and his wife, Dr. Kristen Dawson, who I just mentioned, she's the CEO of Expedition Mental Health here in Kentucky. Like they looked out for my family while I was deployed last year in a way that no one ever has in my 16 years in the military. Like they are good people to the core, and I'm like honored to be a member of the staff there and to get to participate. Like they genuinely care about each one of their patients and are trying to solve for how to help and how to bring this to as many people as possible, to give everybody as high a quality of life as they possibly can. Like I love the people that I get to work with at Wild Health.
Yeah, no, they've totally made me feel like family. Taking that trip to Papa John's house, I didn't know what to expect, but everybody, super down to earth. It's just a bunch of dudes who just love to have a good time, easy going, good vibes. So no, they've truly been super helpful for me on my fitness journey, on my health journey. You've obviously helped me find a new version of myself, a much more powerful version of myself. I got my diet in line. I've gained 15 pounds. My body feels tougher. And something that you and I touch on a lot is, finding my flow state and being able to find my best self under pressure, or being able to sustain my level longer when my back's against the wall. And no, man, I mean, being able to really dive into my psyche this year, dive deeper into my health, into my diet. I feel like I'm the strongest and fittest and most confident version of myself that I've ever been. So kudos to Wild Health.
Yeah, it's and we try to get that personalized medicine in a holistic sort of way, right? Like there you could kind of think of life in four orders of meaning if you wanted to. There's biological and there's psychological, and then there's this ethical, social connection level, and then there's a spiritual level. And we try to touch on every one of those with every person, right? Like the genetics in the labs is the biology level. The psychology, we can address what are your habits? Why do you eat the way you do? Why do you go to bed when you do? Why do you get up when you do? All of those sorts of things. Dialing that in is useful. But then there's this next level, right? There's always a way to level up. In Kristen and my mental health practice, we use this acronym SHOT: stabilize, heal, optimize, and thrive, for the patient journey trajectory. Like if somebody's acutely suicidal, they need stabilization. But once they're stabilized, they need to heal. And once they're healed, oftentimes that's when you get kicked to the curb in traditional medical context. It's like, all right, well, great, you're feeling better. See you next year. And we continue to work with people about optimizing their life and looking at how to thrive. And that's what we're doing with, executives and athletes like you is, hey, you're in the top X number. You're in the top 3% of performance in your particular area. How do we get you into the top 1%? And it's amazing how many of the same tools used in specific personalized ways to you help people to move the needle just that much further. And that's a ton of what the work that you and I have done is around trying to figure out specifically what are the mantras for Tyson that are going to get him out of a hole and back into a flow state, or to stay in a flow state once you're in one. What are the triggers? What are those sorts of things, right? And it's amazing the conversations that I have with folks like you who are high performers, how behind closed doors similar those conversations are to the conversations I have with acutely suicidal people about, hey, how do we get you out of this hole and get you back to where you want to live again? It's remarkable.
Yeah, and it's funny how confidence can be your best friend, and it can also be your worst nightmare. You know, like I can't tell you how many times where, if I have a slight ounce of confidence, I can get over the hump. I can believe in myself. Nobody's second guessing me. But if I lose just the slightest ounce of confidence, how I could like barely get up out of bed, and I'm worried about my bracket, or I'm worried about playing certain players that are matched up on my bracket. But it's a very powerful thing, and I feel like just finding a more pure version of myself. That hero to zero theory. I feel like it's super beneficial. Like I'm much more grateful now. Something we talk about as well is just having a better connection with my wife and my family, and how if that's connected, I can perform better. I can believe in myself better. But I think there's so many variables that go into that. You know.
Yeah. In mental health research, we focus very heavily on like receptors and brain regions, and it's very individualistic, like the serotonin receptor or the dopamine receptor. Like you listen to, the Huberman Lab podcast, and it's just a ton about like dopamine does this and dopamine does that, and it's impressive how much that man's forgotten more about dopamine than I ever learned in the first place. But there's another level to that, right? Like it's not like brains exist in isolation. Like you inherited your brain from your parents. You passed the brain that your kids have onto them genetically, right? And we can start to think of ourselves as nodes in a network, not just, hey, there's this serotonin receptor and it matters for being antidepressant in a certain way that we hit it with a medicine. Like your whole brain connects with your wife's whole brain in these unique ways that either promotes or demotes, health and wholeness and happiness in your family, right? And that's some of the stuff, honestly, like that again, coming back to the weekend where we got to, they got the tribes united all the clans and hung out and had a good time there, right? Was when I got to see some of the ways in which you interact with your family in person rather than just the ways that we've been doing kind of phone call conversations around a bunch of that. I know your brand is around like being a pickleball player and being a coach and being a family man. And that's a really big deal, right? And what I got to see, if I could talk about you for just a minute on your podcast, right?
Please.
Is this ability that is intensely unique. Like I have a buddy, he was a Marine Scout sniper, and he told me about this instructor that he had in sniper school, that the guy was a legend. He could just knock down targets 1.5 miles away all day long, but he couldn't fucking teach anybody else how to do that, right? Like he would just lay down he'd be like, if somebody's struggling, he'd be like, all right, well, just watch this. He'd lay down, fire 3 shots and be like, yeah, just do that. Right. And they'd be like, well, that was what I was trying to do before. You didn't help me at all. Couldn't communicate effectively how to do what they did. There's tons of players who are top 1% players, right? And then you find coaches. There's a ton of coaches who played, but they're better analysts or they're better communicators than they are players, right? And they figure out how to get a long-term coaching career. There's tons of examples across all the sport, right? Where, they like Yogi Berra is my favorite example, right? Like he was a way better coach. He had all these great little aphorisms that he still, the Berra-isms or whatever. He was a decent catcher. Like they, was on a good team and stuff, but he was a great coach, right? And there's tons of people who fall in one category or the other. What I'm excited about, following your career is that you are a top 1% performer, but you've got this ability to communicate that like top 1% performance to people as a coach that I think is derived from some of your ability to be, a dad and a family man. Like that triangle of your brand makes perfect sense, so that there's some longevity, some franchise, some empire like level stuff that there's the potential for you to have even after you like put the paddle down in terms of competitive sport.
For sure.
I think you've got decades ahead of you of like just creating what we call in the military a force multiplier effect. Tons of players that are coming up now are all going to be talking about the way that you influence them as a coach for years and years to come. So I'm excited to just get to sit back and watch some of that stuff happen for you, man.
Well, thank you, brother. Appreciate that, man. You know, I think having a dad as a coach growing up, my oldest brother is also a wrestling coach, definitely kind of falls in our blood. But yeah, it doesn't always go hand in hand. You don't always have a very good athlete that can also communicate in their sport and can teach very well. So I'm definitely blessed to have that. And something I would love to touch on is this book of yours called Antiheroes Journey. Yeah. I just got through the book, mind-boggling. I'm still trying to put all the pieces together. I'm still trying to work this thing out and see how it all makes sense. But I thought the book was very inspiring. If you don't mind, just give us the biggest motivator why you wrote the book.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you. Like, I lived the book; it is my life story, and I wrote the book, and I still don't completely fucking understand what's going on with that book, man. Like, there's a lot. There's a lot in 150 pages or like a 3-hour audio book or whatever going on. I'll go back every once in a while and be like, what the fuck was I trying to say here or whatever. The idea is about 8 out of 10 adults, when surveyed in the United States, said that they've never taken a psychedelic substance, but that they're curious about it, right? And this psychedelic assisted therapy is just blowing the lid off of mental health research at this point. Like, it's unparalleled. The way that the microscope changed biology and the telescope changed astronomy, the psychedelics is going to change psychology. The way that we're going to map out what it is to be human and how to heal and to be fully optimized and thriving is going to change so much in the next 10 years as these psychedelic substances get legalized in clinical context or in general contexts. But there's tons of stigma, there's tons of confusion, there's tons of fear. Like, what if I have a bad trip? Well, it's illegal. Well, all of these different things. So the idea behind the book is, this could be a psychedelic experience for you in just a book or in just listening to an audio book. You take a big old dose of magic mushrooms or LSD and you bought your ticket and you're going to ride the ride. But if you're just listening to an audio book, or if you're just reading a book and you start to get a little nauseous, you start to tear up a bit or get double vision, you can just put it down and you can give yourself a rest. So it was me telling my life story as if it were a psychedelic assisted therapy medicine session. So it's a bit mind bending and warped, and I'm channeling Hunter S. Thompson at parts, and I'm, like just having a good time. Like, I laughed the whole way through writing it, and I cried the whole way through writing it. It was therapeutic for me to just go through the process, and then I wound up putting it out into the world, and I'm hopeful that a whole lot of people will benefit from it in the same way that, taking a psychedelic medicine is just one of many ways to heal, one of many ways to gain insight into yourself. I think that the book, like the byline I use on the website, is there are lots of books about psychedelics. This book is a psychedelic. And that's the idea, is if you want a gateway into it, this is a safe, completely legal gateway. And then I've got friends out in Colorado where mushrooms are legal who like to, push play on the audiobook after they take some of those legal psychedelic substances.
Oh, yeah.
And they said that version of the Antiheroes Journey is about as intense a version as you could imagine. So you can dip your toe in for the first time, or you can go varsity on it and where it's legal to use a psychedelic, go ahead and listen to the audiobook. Back in the 70s, they used to do that with Alice in Wonderland. They'd put that on a vinyl record and start playing the audiobook of Alice in Wonderland, and people would take a psychedelic journey that way. And I'm excited to hear that like people are experimenting in that way, where it's legal and where it's safe to do those sorts of things, right?
Hey, Ben, tell us, where can my viewers purchase that book, or where can they find that?
Yeah, just go to my website, antiheroesjourney.com, and hit download the journey now. Or I've got a Shopify store there with, hats and T-shirts and all of that sort of stuff. That's the easiest way to get a hold of it. I've already knocked over half off of the price. It's like $20 to get this thing now, because I just want to get it out there and make it so that anybody can afford it. And then on top of that, if your listeners want to get 10% off anything in the store, 10% off the audiobook, ebook, it's a combo bundle. You get the ebook and the audiobook. If you use the code all caps McGuffin10, you can get 10% off of anything that I got there.
Also, I will have this on my link tree on my socials. So for viewers that maybe can't find the website, you can simply just go to my socials, Tyson McGuffin, and take a look at that link tree. Ben, give us a scoop on the title, Antiheroes Journey.
Yeah, so the hero's journey is pretty familiar to a lot of people at this point. Are you familiar with the hero's journey? Yeah. So Joseph Campbell's a famous scholar who wrote The Hero with 1,000 Faces, describing this pattern that in ancient mythologies and religions, and really it's taken hold of pop culture now, right? With all the superhero movies and the Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia and Star Wars, and it all seems to fit this one literary pattern of a hero getting a calling and separating from their tribe or their community and being initiated in some way that's difficult, going to war or, having a psychedelic experience or fighting dragons or whatever it might be, and then returning from that initiation having learned lessons that they can disperse to their community. And this is a big way in which a lot of people will do psychedelic assisted therapy, is the hero's journey, the hero with 1,000 faces. And I think that has been a beneficial way of looking at life for us since like the time that we crawled down out of the trees as, evolving into human beings in the first place. I think it's beneficial, but I think it's time we put it away and recognize that it's just kind of a children's story. It's helpful maybe for a stage of our development as a species, but that it's time to recognize that life is more complex and complicated than those simple categories of like hero versus villain or victim and bystander. Because the fact of the matter is that an anti-hero in literature is somebody who doesn't fit into those easy categories. It's Deadpool in the comic book. It's right. Walter White from Breaking Bad, who's, breaking all these laws, but doing it for the family or, for, whatever reasons, right? It's not simple to say, like, is this a hero? Sometimes I hate this guy. Or is this a villain? Sometimes I love him and he's exactly the way that I want to be. And I think that's, if you followed me around for a week, that's what you'd think about me. God, this guy's a real piece of shit. Look at him cutting those people off. Oh, man, but now he's like talking to suicidal people and they want to live. Like he's a real, and look, he loves his kids and but there he is being a dickhead again. Like, why? What's wrong with this guy? This is just being human. Being human doesn't fit so easily into this like black and white, either or basic sort of red state versus blue state, your team versus my team logic. Being human is a lot more like being an anti-hero. And to be able to integrate all of life in that way is a lot of the way that I approach doing psychedelic assisted therapy is, hey, look, the hero's journey is great for kids, but if you want to grow the fuck up, it's time for the anti-hero's journey.
Right. So in the book, you mentioned zero ventures further than a hero. If you don't mind just elaborating on that.
Yeah, the anti-hero's journey is about endurance, ultimately, right? Like this is a crazy planet to be like born onto, right? Like there's volcanoes and there's earthquakes and there's, the craziest species of animals out there. And there's stuff that grows in the dirt that you can eat that'll send you on this weird psychedelic journey. Like this is an insane planet, right? And that an element of endurance has been a theme of my life all the way throughout. So it winds up being a theme in this book is like, you just have to, whatever obstacles are in your way, whatever life throws at you, you can get through that. There are ways to just keep fucking going. You don't have to call it quits. Like the anti-hero's journey is intensely anti-suicidal. There's a bunch of talk about, developing a higher level of consciousness across society and that, we're all, evolving as a species to a higher level. We're going to ascend as a planet into the fourth dimension or whatever, like however you want to talk about any of that sort of stuff. I think, whatever any of that means, it winds up getting tied in with metaphors of suicidality, like that you have to have this, suicidal intensity level of, ego death in a psychedelic experience or in therapy. And I just don't agree. I think that you need maybe that level of energy and that level of intensity, but you need it oriented towards life-giving and loving sorts of things. So like I say in the book, my mission in life is to embody all of the paradoxes in a way that overcomes fear, with love, which, to oversimplify the mechanism of action of MDMA, is what MDMA does inside of somebody's brain. Right. Turns down fear circuitry, turns up love and connection circuitry. And that's a way that we've discovered that heals PTSD more efficaciously, robustly, and durably than anything else we've discovered so far. So that's part of why I write the book the way that I do. Part of why I am the way that I am in the world is just all about all the mysteries of life, all the paradoxes, all the ways that life can be super confusing and throw things at you don't understand. You can endure them. You don't have to be afraid of them. Love is something that can carry you through all of that. So focus on that and drive on.
What about this? Think for yourself or not at all, baby?
Yeah.
Think for yourself or not at all, okay? Figure it out.
Yeah, like that's a ton of everybody wants a teacher. Everybody wants a guide. Everybody wants the expert. They want
Give me my ribbon, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
Give me my participation ribbon.
And that's what a ton of people come to me for in the first place, right? Like you're a combat veteran. You got, a medical license. You got all of this stuff. You're the hero. You're the hero with 1,000 faces.
You're the guy.
The whole book is fuck that. That's not me. I'm still just a dude.
Awesome.
That's all that I am. That's all that I'll ever be. This is my name. I don't need a pseudonym. I don't need whatever. Like all these letters. I got more degrees than Fahrenheit at this point, and it's all, just masks that we wear. It's the zero with 1,000 faces that underneath it all, you pull all of that stuff away, and you got to live your own life. You got to make your own decisions. Yes, by all means, read all the books, ask all the questions, make all the friends, listen to all the experts, and then when that's all said and done and you've taken in as much as you can and you got to make the decision, think for yourself or not at all.
Right. Something else that you mentioned is, I thought this was kind of interesting, shadow work versus integration therapy.
Yeah.
If you don't mind just touching on that.
Yeah. And that's another buzzword in psychedelic assisted therapy at this point, and it should be. It's important work. Shadow work comes out of the Jungian tradition from Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst, student and colleague of Sigmund Freud way back in the day. But Jung had his own take on all of those things, and the shadow is essentially the part of your subconscious, the part of your mind, where you store all the things that you don't want to admit are true of yourself, among other things. There's a lot going on with shadow work, but that's kind of the nub of the issue is, I'm a good dude. I don't do anything terrible. Yeah. It's all of and you stuff it down so that it's out of your field of vision.
It's not there.
It winds up popping up like holding a beach ball underwater. That shit just comes up sideways, and you see it on somebody else. Like you cast your shadow all around you instead of dealing with the fact that it's there. So when I see the things that I know are true subconsciously about myself on somebody else, my shadow on them, I just want to destroy it. Oh, fuck that. That's the worst thing in the world. They're a terrible person. Look at the way that they just talk to that person is just absolutely unacceptable. And a day and a half ago, you were talking to somebody exactly that way. And you just don't remember it because it's in the shadow that's behind you instead of the shadow that's in front of you, right? And a big piece of what we call integration work is integrating everything that it is to be you, including all the dark side, including all the bad stuff, including all taking a real honest look at that, shining a flashlight into the shadow to the degree that you're able to see it and acknowledging this is a part of who I am and this part is welcome here. I can be accepting of it. I can bring it into the fold. And it's as soon as you shine the light into the shadow, the monsters disappear. That's a ton of the psychedelic assisted therapy recommendations. You take a psychedelic, you can have monsters show up. You can get eaten by a dragon. Shit like that happens to people in those spaces. And then what are you supposed to do to make sense of that sort of stuff? Well, to some degree, your psyche is creating that for you for a reason. I had an experience like that. I talked about it on Rocco Vargas's podcast a week ago, where the point is, if you're seeing demons, if you're seeing monsters, your own psyche made that to teach you a lesson, and you need to go straight at that shit and say, hey, what are you doing here? What are you here to teach me? And over and over again.
Meet that face to face.
Yeah, just go straight at it.
Walk through it.
Yeah, keep fucking going. That's the point, right? My experience of getting stuck in a psychedelic space, I felt like I died every death that anyone's ever died in the last 13 billion years.
Told me this story and it scared the hell out of me, by the way.
Killed over and over and over again, to the point where like I thought I had actually died, gone to hell, and I live here now. Now in clock time, less than an hour had gone by, right? But, like, I am locked into this awful fucking experience. And there's monsters and
I feel like
demons.
it's been a
like,
lifetime, right?
Disemboweled, burned alive, head cut off, just like the most cinematic, horrible things I'm experiencing, right? And they still feel like real memories to me right now, man. But it was when I was able to find humor in it. Whenever I just was like, okay, I guess I live here now, and something would come to kill me, I'd be like, it'd be like choking me to death, and I'd be like, didn't we do this like 3 million times ago? Like, oh, real fucking original. You're just going to choke me to death again? Are you running out of stuff to do? And when it connected with humor, I was able to escape. Like, I moved to a different chapter of that experience after connecting with humor, which was where I connected with, like, my brand has like this Deadpool, it's different enough from Deadpool to dodge any like trademark issues or whatever, but it's got my head on it or whatever. Was like that character in the comics or in the movies feels it all, right? Just gets pulled apart and feels it and then has to regenerate. And the way that he navigates that is with humor, like talking to himself and cracking jokes and dealing with that stuff. I felt like I connected on like a soul level with that particular character, that particular anti-hero. And it's that humor that saw me through childhood, that's seen me through deployments where life sucks and you're just making the most of it. It was that connection with humor that my psyche knew that I needed, was my way of navigating out of. That's how I get out of hell. Whenever I'm in hell, in a hellscape headspace right here, right now, like we've talked about, like you were saying, where you're just worried about like, what do the standings say? What's the next thing? What did they say about me in the news? What is all
Who's
this
in my
stuff?
bracket? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Who's going to stab me in the back today or whatever, right? My way out of that is with humor, with connecting with other people and making them laugh and laughing myself. That has seen me through the absolute worst experiences of my life, and that joy connects with love as soon as it's shared with somebody else. A wise old ranger once told me that joy shared is joy multiplied, and grief shared is grief divided. And that's a ton of what we do in therapy, in life, in friendship, in general, is that whenever something brings you joy, share it with as many people as you can and see how much it amplifies that joy. And whenever something rips your heart out, sharing that with somebody else is what's going to make it seem lighter. And that's a ton of what I just do professionally at this point, is just carry those sorts of things. People tear their grief in half and they give me half, and I carry that with me too. And I'm in a place, thank God, thanks to medicine and therapy and family and friends and all of the good things that we talked about, where I'm able to put a whole bunch of people's heavy stories into a rucksack and carry them. And that's my plan, is to just
not a lot of people can do that.
For as long as God lets me keep breathing, I'll just keep dividing grief with people and helping them carry it. And multiplying joy would be an awful lot of fun too. I know that's some of why I have a podcast now, is just having some of the same sorts of conversations with people who are, on the other end of the bell curve today and who are doing real well. Getting to ask them some of the same questions that I wind up talking to suicidal people about is one of my ways of just doing integration publicly out in front of everybody. You get on my podcast and you can hear what like the Joint Task Force Surgeon for Special Operations Command has to say about these questions, like the chief or the economics chair of the department at the University of Louisville, right? Like same questions, what are his answers? And you just get to compare notes. Eventually I'll get you on my podcast and I'll ask you those questions too, and we'll just keep fucking going. Keep asking the same questions and see what people have to say.
But yeah, so how you found humor in your psychedelic trip, I think finding like some sort of comfort where you can get yourself over the hump, you can break through. I hear a lot of people say that. I have a good buddy that did a DMT trip. Same thing, like he had the hardest time breaking through, but once he was able just to kind of let go, break through, he was able to see some pretty wild things. His dad passed away about a decade prior. He was able to like talk to his dad and have this full conversation with his dad. But it all depended on him being able to break through and kind of see all that stuff. And I feel like there's so many people that do a psychedelic trip and they're either they have the wrong mentality going in, they have a ton of anxiety going in, they're not in the right headspace. but just allowing yourself to let go and truly take on the whole experience, I feel like is like the most essential thing, you know?
Yeah. And over again, it's not surprising to me at this point how much the catharsis, the breakthrough point, immediately orients someone towards a connection to family or friends. Immediately, your friend there described connecting with the grief and reconnecting with his father. I had Wiz Buckley on my podcast. He's a Top Gun FA-18 Hornet pilot and a Wall Street exec, and he shares like an hour-long version of his ibogaine 5-MeO DMT experience, and it was just a ton of connection with a sister and his father that he'd lost, and God, connecting with Source and getting to see, pull back the curtain and what's actually going on with life in this very spiritual sort of way. For me, breaking all the way through when I got out of like hell, the end of that particular journey just pointed me back to my wife, to my soulmate, like that I'm just a body and that she's a soul, like that we're just, are so connected at such a level that, she's just the best person I've ever met, man. Like we got tattoos at like our 18th anniversary.
Oh yeah.
We finally like made it tattoo official for our wedding rings and
Tat
stuff.
official.
Like, she's just the
That's
best
funny.
person that I've ever met. I've met a ton of people, and she's just the best person that I ever met, man.
It's beautiful having a good lady. I'll tell you what, that is the key to life. I actually said that in a previous interview. After my match, I just gave credit to my wife and how there's so many ups and downs with my career and me as an athlete, me as a dad. And if there's one person that's so supportive, that's always in my corner, no matter if I'm a chump or not, she's always there. No, man, it just makes life easy having a good woman and having a beautiful family. And, seems like we're just some blessed men.
Yeah. I can't even, like, we live in a fucking simulation. Like, I don't even know how I wound up, being as lucky as I am, being as connected as I am, like all of these good people. I say it, like the way I'll say it a lot of the time is I just feel like I stumbled headlong into getting into rooms with people who are just better people than me and then trying to live up to like the willingness that they have to take me in. That's how I feel about Wild Health. That's how I feel about a ton of the mentors that I've had along the way in the military and in medicine. Like over and over again, I just wind up connecting with amazing people and that they give me a shot. And then I get the chance to at least play my part and do my role there. Like I'll be forever grateful.
No, for sure. Find good people and hang on to them.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's touch on mental health. So, so what causes it? Why is there so many people, athletes, business people, that are talking about it now compared to 10 years ago? And in your line of work, what do you do to help mental health?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm glad that like the stigma's been being pulled away for a really long time, right? It's people coming out in the open, like I'm doing right now, like you've done on your podcast, just being honest about like I'm human and I struggle and I fucked up a whole bunch of ways, and then like this is how I got out. It's like a starving person finds bread and says, "Hey guys, there's bread over here. Like everybody just come over here." That's been going on long enough that now it's okay to not be okay out in public. And
let me touch on this. There's no way I would have ever came out with my mental health and how I feel without having you in my corner. You've kind of opened the door for me, really like let me feel less vulnerable with opening up. And I think it's very difficult to open up about your mental health if you're not talking to somebody about it,
Yeah. It's that, that connection. And some of, it helps having, like a combat veteran as your, coach or whatever. Like, I got your back, man, and I'll shoot something from a mile away if we got to or whatever. Right? But in terms of like mental health, like let's talk about it in sport, right? Like the HBO did a documentary a couple of years ago called The Weight of Glory. Michael Phelps was in it, talking about some, like he's got more gold medals than like, I have fingers, and he struggles with mental health. What does that mean? Like Simone Biles took a mental health day during the Olympics and everybody just threw rocks at her for that. Like what was going on with some of these sorts of things? Like if you dig into the history, the suicide rate among Olympic athletes is like almost 20 times the regular rate compared with like, age adjusted cohort, like for regular folks like the rest of us who don't get the shot at going to the Olympic Games or whatever. And it's predictable. Like you have this high stress event that years of your life have been oriented towards preparing for. And then whether you win or you lose or you place at all of that stress builds up and then releases. And over again, athletes go into a depressive episode. But because you're an athlete, there's a whole bunch of rules around like whether you can take medicine, who you can see for therapy, like what's safe and what's not safe. And then we do a real poor job because Olympic athletes are amateur athletes of taking care of them compared to the pros. So there's just a huge gap in care where there's also like a very predictable situation where we know after this event, you're going to collapse across the finish line. Like a percentage of these people, right, regardless of who they are just going to need so much more support than they're getting. What are we supposed to do about that, right? That's just one example, was from, that documentary. There's plenty of other examples that could be multiplied from, military returning home from deployments to, whatever the boom bust cycle is in your particular market that you're working in, whatever it is. Like, it's predictable that if you have a mind at a certain point, you're going to have mental health struggles, and that we need to do a good job of providing care and support around that. And I do think that ketamine assisted therapy in particular is a useful one in like tactical athletes and professional athletes, where because it has such a short half-life in the body, it's about 15 minutes and it's about 5.5 half-lives. That's all the longer that the medicine is in somebody's system. So it's, an hour and a half, couple hours most, that, in a therapeutic context, properly supervised by a medical professional, where the dose is given and that's it. This isn't like an at-home situation, or you've got this opportunity to abuse those sorts of things. Whenever it's well monitored, there's this window of opportunity afterwards where you're essentially growing new neurons, and you can do good therapy. You can eat a clean diet. You can feel much better about yourself, despite whether you tripped over a high hurdle in the biggest event of your life and didn't even place or whatever. You can kind of you can reverse some of the stress around some of that stuff predictably, and then you're not taking a pill every day. You're not on something that's altering you for performance or any of that sort of stuff. You can just kind of, the way that you go into a pit stop for a race car, you can kind of go into a pit stop for your brain and your soul through ketamine assisted therapy.
Love that. And tell me, what are the main differences you see with an individual after doing ketamine assisted therapy?
Yeah. The biggest deal, so it varies from person to person, right? Like, it's not a predictable sort of thing. And is it okay if I explain how ketamine works the way that I do it to patients?
Yes, totally fine. Yep.
Yeah. I like to explain it like the movie 300. You ever see 300 with Gerard Butler playing King Leonidas, and the 300 Spartans go to Thermopylae, which means the hot gates. Yeah, the hot gates. And they pick that spot strategically and tactically for a reason. That's where 300 Spartans could take on the 10,000 armies of the Persian Empire and hold them back, right? In order for the rest of Greece to get on board and figure out what the hell's going on. There's this little spot. So the way ketamine works is it's a non-competitive N-methyl D aspartate receptor antagonist, which doesn't mean anything to anybody other than science nerds like me, right? But there's a cluster of these receptors in a little part of your brain called the lateral habenula, which is a really important tactical, strategic location in your brain for how depression and trauma and anxiety loops work. So by ketamine having its effect on the receptors that are most dense in this tiny little spot in your brain, it essentially acts like 300 Spartans going in there and holding off depression and anxiety and trauma for the period of time that it's in there. That allows then, downstream from that, it upregulates something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is like miracle grow for your brain. If you've been under chronic stress long enough, chronically depressed, chronically dealing with trauma, you lose density in certain parts of your brain, and you can regrow some of that density, regrow new neurons as a result of upregulating brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is essentially like buying time for the rest of Greece to show up to fight off the Persian Empire of depression and trauma, right? So that's the opportunity that ketamine gives somebody, is a rapid-acting antidepressant and rapidly anti-suicidal, in part through its way of working on this tiny little spot in your brain called the lateral habenula.
Love that. And tell me, have you done a ketamine-assisted trip? Or I guess,
Yes.
You have?
Yeah, so I haven't done many. I was doing this for other people for about 2 years, and I said I'm doing all right. Like I'm doing all right enough, and I'm just providing this. But it was after I went to the MDMA assisted therapy training. There was a real nice lady there, Duran Young. I just recorded a podcast with her a couple days ago on my pod. She's the founder of Black Therapist Rock. She's a veteran from the Air Force. She was a captain and a social worker. She's an amazing lady. She pulled me aside during the training and was like, "Hey, man, you've never done any of this medicine before, have you?" And I was like, "Is it that obvious? Like, does it say narc on my forehead? Like, I'm the big ugly guy?" And yeah, sure. But it was kind of like being a licensed marriage and family therapist, but being like a single 40-year-old virgin or whatever, right? Like, it was that obvious to everybody else in the room. Like, hey, maybe this guy should do some medicine or whatever, right? So I went to, my doctor and said, "Hey, like, I think this, what do you think?" And just talked to the professionals about it and like got care from someone else and wasn't, like, I've been doing this for other people for a long time. And then just a few times, man, has changed my life in such dramatic ways, like to get to see what other people have been experiencing, what I've been providing for them. I mean, it was just, and that was just last fall that I had my first experience of that, right? And it was this spring that my son said to my wife, like, "Hey, Dad's not mad at all anymore. Like, he's a lot of fun." And man, like, that kind of broke my heart a little bit, right?
No,
that he was
that goes a long way.
That's how he received me for a long
for
time,
sure.
was that I was an angry guy. But that now, like, he's getting older. He's like, a decade into being on the planet, and he still likes to cuddle sometimes watching movies and stuff.
Doesn't get better than that, huh?
Yeah, like he wants to come be with me because I'm fun and I'm not angry. And like, it's not just ketamine that did that, but ketamine was a prime mover alongside of all the therapy that I've been in. Like, I've got my therapist and I talk to them on the regular and stuff. And yeah, man, it has been a game changer for me in ways that I really, even after watching it be a game changer for so many other people, like to have the experience myself is just opened my eyes to how much potential there is to do good in the world with just this. And then the data around the stuff that's going to be legalized in the next year or so with MDMA and psilocybin, like that's, ketamine has its place, but I think that the durability of the effectiveness of those medicines is just going to be a game changer for so many people in so many different walks of life.
Ben, tell me, where can my fans and viewers follow your podcast?
Yeah, the podcast is everywhere that there's podcasts, Spotify and Apple and iTunes and Audible and Google Play and Podbean and whatever else is out there. It's called the Antiheroes Journey podcast. There's a link to it on my website, antiheroesjourney.com. And then I'm on all the social media stuff on Facebook and Twitter, or not, I guess it's called X now. I don't know. Threads.
So
it's all at Doc Askins because, as a combat medic for a decade, so my nickname's Doc, even though I'm technically not a doctor. I'm a physician assistant, right?
Yeah, right. So you're on Instagram, Facebook, and X.
Yes, and TikTok and LinkedIn. And
look at you on TikTok, huh?
Yeah.
Look at you looking all fancy over there.
I know. Like, well, it just seems like, like my kids are coming up and they're watching that stuff, right? And it's mostly like, what flavor Tide Pod should we try this weekend is like how mental health gets addressed on TikTok. And I was like, we need some actual adults putting out some actual good info on mental health on TikTok. All the risks, all the like China security threats and stuff. Like, I don't love being on TikTok, man, but like, I do want to make the world a safer place for my kids. Like,
good man. I
would straight up crawl through a mile of broken glass to make the world 1% better for my kids. And if that means being on friggin' TikTok, I'll be on friggin' TikTok.
Good man. What do you guys have going on for Christmas?
Yeah, my mom's in town, and we're just going to hang out, have a good time, watch maybe some Christmas movies. We always have, like, a ridiculous amount of food on Christmas Eve, and then there's this, like, Icelandic tradition of giving people a book on Christmas Eve. I forget what it's called, but it's pretty cool, and we all get a book, and we all watch the movies, and we all eat too much and hang out and just love each other. And, my wife is still like a little kid on Christmas Eve, man. Like, she can't sleep, and she's just so excited, and like, she keeps me up half the night, and then we're up at the butt crack of dawn, and like, I can barely see, and we're opening presents and stuff, and everybody takes a nap in the middle of the day because we're just up too early. Yeah.
So Ben, I want to let you know, man, I am super grateful, very appreciative to have you in my corner this last year. And thanks again for coming on my podcast, buddy.
Yeah, my pleasure, brother. I'm looking forward to all the good things coming for you and me.
Lots of good stuff. Ben, thanks again. My name is Tyson McGuffin. This is the McGuffin Show, and we'll see you guys next episode.